In his cramped little house, water rattled through the pipes, and the furniture leaned tiredly against the walls, waiting to be fixed. The place always felt smaller than it was, as though the walls pressed closer each year. Matthew stayed inside most days, filling the silence with chores. He had just finished washing the dishes, his hands damp and smelling faintly of soap. The plates stacked neatly, though the sink still leaked drops of water that tickled like a clock. The house was quiet, too quiet sometimes, and he was glad when his parents told him they'd be stepping out to visit his cousin. They urged him to come along, and after a moment, he sighed, changed his shirt, and followed. The city heat pressed down on him as soon as they stepped outside. The air was heavy, carrying the smell of exhaust and fried food from vendors tucked under their umbrellas. Jeepneys rattled past, their horns blaring like arguments, while motorcycles darted between cars. A man shouted from across the street, selling fruits, his voice nearly swallowed by the commotion. Matthew trailed behind, watching everything and nothing, until they passed the cemetery park. Rows of headstones stretched out in neat gray lines. Some had wilted flowers, others had fresh ones, their colors bright against the stone. Candles flickered weakly in the daylight, their smoke winding into the air like tiny prayers. In front of a few graves, food was laid out: rice, meat, sweet breads, as though the departed might still come to eat. Matthew slowed, uneasy. His parents noticed and lowered their voices, as if the graveyard itself was listening. "Don't ever take food from the dead," his father warned. "The spirits won't forgive it." Matthew nodded, not sure he believed it, but not willing to test it either. The thought stayed with him, quietly haunting the back of his mind. A few days later, grief struck. His best friend Steve was gone. The news spread quickly. His body had been found in an alley on one street, late at night. No one could explain what happened. The police only called it an unsolved case, their words clipped, as if they were too unsettled by the details they could not share. Matthew carried the weight quietly. At Steve's funeral, he forced himself to walk up to the casket, his throat tightening as he looked at his friend's face one last time. It was still Steve, but changed, stiffened, and silent. He whispered a goodbye under his breath, words meant only for the two of them, then drifted toward the food tables. People were talking in low voices, sharing memories, eating to fill the space grief left behind. Before leaving, he wrapped a few pieces of food in napkins, slipping them into a bag. By the time he stepped outside, the sky had already darkened, clouds rolling in to cover the last streaks of sunset. The air felt colder. He quickened his pace, his bag of food swinging against his leg. But then he noticed something. A black cat was following him, padding silently, its eyes catching the light of the street lamps. At first, he ignored it. Cats were everywhere. But the farther he walked, the closer it seemed. Each step deliberate, its stare unblinking. Then it lunged. Matthew stumbled back, shock coursing through him. The chase drove him into a narrow alley, shadows stretching long and sharp around him. Only then did he realize the cat hadn't just attacked, it had cornered him, guided him here on purpose. Just as the black cat crouched to spring again, another figure appeared, a white cat. Recognition struck immediately. He had cared for it as a stray when it was still a fragile kitten, feeding it scraps, nursing it back to health. Now, grown, it stood between him and the black cat. A faint glow seemed to radiate from its fur, soft enough to push the darkness back. The black cat hissed, but after a tense pause, it slunk away into the shadows. Matthew leaned against the wall, heart hammering, breathing hard. The white cat gazed at him calmly, almost reassuringly. But the relief that washed over him didn't last. The black cat hadn't been defeated. It had only retreated. That night, Matthew laid awake. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps on the stairs. The drip, drip of the pipe beneath the sink grew louder, like a steady knock, knock, knock. When sleep finally came, it was uneasy, and his dreams were cruel. He saw Steve standing in the alley where he had been found. His friend's eyes were hollow, his face pale, his mouth unmoving. Slowly, Steve raised an arm and pointed behind him. Matthew turned and saw two glowing eyes in the darkness. He woke screaming, drenched in sweat. The sound caught in his throat. Days passed. Matthew became more cautious, softer in the way he spoke, careful in his steps, as though afraid to disturb something unseen. Sometimes he felt Steve's presence nearby, a laugh he recognized, a hand on his shoulder that wasn't there. At first, it was almost comforting, but other nights, the air felt wrong. Shadows in the corner of his house stretched too far. Whispers curled through the silence, just out of reach. When he looked out the window, the black cat was there, sitting perfectly still, its stare fixed on him. The white cat appeared less often, as if it were fading. One evening, rushing home, Matthew stopped short. The black cat was waiting at the corner. Its eyes burned a deeper red than before. He walked faster, but the scrape of claws followed. One by one, the street lights above him sputtered and died, leaving only pools of darkness. When he finally turned, his breath caught. The black cat wasn't alone. Figures stepped from the shadows, shapes bent and unfamiliar, their movements stiff, their eyes glowing red. "Help!" Matthew shouted, but the night swallowed his voice. Then, light. The white cat appeared. Relief surged through him until he realized something was wrong. The glow wasn't gentle anymore. Its eyes shifted, red bleeding into them until they matched the black cat's. The two stood together, not as enemies, but as one. Matthew staggered back, shaking his head. "No, you were supposed to protect me." Cats crouched low, tails flicking, their eyes cutting into him. And then he heard Steve's voice. At first, gentle, calling his name the way it once had. But as the figures closed in, it changed. Hard, guttural, commanding. From the crowd of shadowed shapes, Steve stepped forward. His face was familiar yet twisted, his eyes glowing like the rest. "It's your turn now, Matthew." The last street lamp flickered once, then went out. Something cold brushed against his ankle. He looked down in horror, dark hands crawling out of the ground, clutching tight. He fought to pull free, his cry torn from his throat, but the night itself seemed to smother the sound. The last thing he saw before the dark claimed him was the white cat, sitting calmly beside the black one, both pairs of crimson eyes locked on him. And then he was gone.